Part 1. The $100 Handoff. People think a quiet man is an empty one. That is the most useful mistake anyone has ever made about me, and my wife makes it fresh every single day. It is almost midnight in my studio, and the only sound is the brush. Paint on canvas has a texture to it, a small drag, like a whisper deciding whether to become a word. I work at night because at night nobody is deciding anything about me. The house sleeps, the judgments sleep. It's just me and the color and the one lamp that still works. I have been called a lot of things in this house. Hobbyist, dreamer, the man Sophia married before she understood what she was worth. That last one is hers. She thinks I never heard it. She said it into a phone in the next room 2 years ago, and I stood in the dark hallway with a cup of tea going cold in my hand, and I decided not to be hurt. It's a decision. Most people don't know that. The studio is small and it smells like turpentine and burnt coffee. One lamp, a work table with tubes squeezed flat. Canvases leaning against the wall like people waiting for a bus that stopped running years ago. This is the one room in the house Sophia never enters. She says the smell gives her a headache. What it actually gives her is nothing to talk about, and Sophia cannot survive in a room that gives her nothing to talk about. Which is how the most valuable thing either of us will ever own has spent 3 years leaning in the corner of a room she refuses to walk into. There is one canvas back there I keep covered, a grey cloth over it, the way you'd drape a bird cage to make the bird sleep. I don't look at it while I work. I don't have to. I know exactly what is under there, down to the last brush stroke, because I put it there. Here is a thing nobody in 8 years has ever asked me. What are you working on, Ethan? Not once. Which is convenient. It means I have never once had to lie about the answer. They see a man in paint-stained clothes and they fill in the rest for free. Failed artist, kept husband, the dull frame around Sophia's much more interesting life. I let them. Filling in another man's blanks is a job people will do all day and never send a bill. The trick to being underestimated is that you have to help. You have to be a little boring on purpose. You have to let them finish the sentence wrong and then agree with it. I've had a lot of practice. I drive an 11-year-old car. I wear the same 3 shirts. Sophia buys handbags that cost more than my car, and every time she does, she tells me I don't understand money. She's right. She has no idea how right. The money isn't the point and never was. The point is the covered canvas in the corner, and a name that isn't the one on my mailbox, and the quiet fact that the thing I'm best at is the thing everyone here is most certain I can't do. The painting on my easel tonight is good. It is not the one that matters. The one that matters is under the cloth, and it has been finished for a long time, and it is worth more than this house, this street, and every car Sophia has ever wanted. I mix a gray on the palette and think about how I got here. A man with a fortune drying in the corner and a wife who calls him a charity case. The answer is that I let it happen. Every part of it. That's the part I never get to explain. Patience is a strange thing to be good at. Nobody gives you a trophy for it. You just sit very still while people mistake stillness for defeat, and you let them build their whole idea of you out of the wrong material. And then one day, the mistake gets expensive. Not because you did anything cruel, because they finally reach for the one thing you were protecting, and they carry it into a room where somebody knows what it is. I used to think the silence in this room was loneliness. It took me years to understand it was privacy. Nobody watches a man they have already decided is dull. That inattention is the most expensive gift I have ever been given, because while nobody was watching, I filed some paperwork. And I made a phone call to a woman who has spent 30 years telling billionaires they are wrong about their own walls. And I waited. I don't know yet that tonight is the night it starts. But somewhere out on the road, there are headlights turning toward this house, and Sophia only comes home with company when she wants a witness. I hear the front gate, then the car, then 2 doors, which is the interesting part. 2 doors means she brought someone to see her do whatever she's about to do. I set the brush down. I don't wipe my hands. I've learned that the people who need you to look at them will always find a way to make sure you do. I let her find the way. The key turns in the lock. Ethan. Her voice arrives before she does, bright and rehearsed. Don't get up, this will only take a second. She is standing in the doorway of my studio in a coat that cost more than everything in this room, and behind her, hands in his pockets, is a man I have met exactly twice and disliked both times, efficiently, without wasting any extra feeling on it. You remember Marcus, she says. I do, Marcus Donovan. He shakes hands like he's doing you a favor and reads a room like it owes him money. Ethan, Marcus nods at me. Good to see the artist in his natural habitat. He lives in here, Sophia says and laughs, and it is not a kind laugh, but it is a confident one, and confidence is the whole reason we are all standing here. Marcus is doing me a favor, she goes on. He just bought a new place downtown, big blank walls. I told him you had piles of this stuff sitting here doing absolutely nothing. Doing nothing. In her mouth, it is the worst thing an object can be accused of. Or a husband. You're giving away my paintings, I say. Not a question. I've learned questions give Sophia room to perform. A flat statement makes her explain herself, and Sophia explaining herself is the most honest she ever gets. Our paintings, she corrects, smiling. This is our house, and you're not using them. They're just leaning there gathering dust and marriage resentment. Some of them sell, I say. Ethan. She says my name the way you'd set down something heavy. One sold, in March, for $400, to your dentist. Let's not build a museum out of it. There it is, the whole marriage in one sentence, and she doesn't even feel the weight of the thing she just picked up and put in his hands. Marcus has already wandered into my studio like a man walking into a gift shop. He lifts one canvas off the wall, the wrong one, of course, the landscape, the good one, and turns it in the lamplight. This isn't bad, he says, surprised, like a man complimenting a dog for doing math. Kind of a garage vibe, in a good way. You've got a whole little sweatshop going in here, huh? A garage vibe, in a good way, a little sweatshop. I file each sentence where I keep the others, the ones I'll never repeat and never forget. Put that down, Sophia says. That's not the one. She takes the landscape from him and leans it back against the wall with the carelessness of a woman handling something she's certain is worthless. Her hand trails along my work table as she crosses the room, a tube of paint nudged, a rag moved an inch, small ownership gestures in a room she spent 3 years refusing to enter. She's comfortable here tonight only because she thinks she's leaving with a trophy. That one, she says, pointing across the studio. She is pointing at the smaller framed piece by the window. Muted color, a figure half turned away. The kind of painting you walk past in a hallway for years without once asking who made it. That one's perfect for you, she tells Marcus. The colors are interesting. Interesting. The word people reach for when they've run out of the word they actually mean, which is nothing. Marcus picks it up. He tilts his head. He gives it the 4 full seconds of a man appraising a wine he has already decided to enjoy so he can tell the table he chose it. Yeah, he says. The palate's a little muddy, but it'll work over the bar. Kind of a moody thing. Guests will ask about it. Guests will ask about it. I nearly smile. Guests are going to ask about it, Marcus. You have no idea how many, and none of the questions are going to be the ones you're expecting. I let the truth stand in the room, unspoken, while he holds it. A man who has never once been wrong about anything is cradling the one thing in his life he does not understand. 4 words for it in my head. He has no idea. Marcus's tie is silk, expensive, and knotted a half-inch too tight. The way men knot ties when they think a tight knot reads as discipline instead of anxiety. It's the most honest thing about him. So, what do I owe you? Marcus asks. And here is the detail that answers every remaining question I had about the two of them. He doesn't ask me. He asks Sophia. In my studio, about my painting. Nothing, Sophia laughs. Take it. It's a gift. Then, because she cannot help herself, because a quiet win has never once been enough for her, she adds, actually, give him 100 for it, so he doesn't feel like a charity case. He likes to feel useful. He likes to feel useful. About her own husband, to her lover, in her husband's own studio. I stand very still and let the sentence finish landing, because a sentence like that does damage on a delay, and I want to be present for all of it. You should sign it, Marcus says to me, turning the painting over, looking for a signature that isn't in the corner he's checking. Adds value, or, sentimental value. It's signed, I say. You're just not looking in the right place. He laughs like that's a joke. It isn't. The signature on that canvas is worth more than his new apartment, and it isn't the name anyone in this room would expect, and he just held it up to the lamp and handed it back to himself. Marcus pulls out his wallet and peels off a single $100 bill. He holds it across the work table toward me, this crisp, folded note, the entire agreed-upon price of the thing under his arm. I look at the bill. I let the moment stretch until it becomes slightly wrong for everyone. Then I look up at him. Give it to Sophia, I say. She's the one selling. The room does a small thing. Not a gasp. Sophia doesn't gasp. She recalculates. Her smile holds, but her eyes run the math of whether I just insulted her or agreed with her, and she can't tell, which is precisely where I wanted to leave her. She takes the bill from Marcus's hand. She folds it once more, without looking at it, and drops it into her purse the way you drop a receipt you have no intention of keeping. Not looking at it, that small motion is the one part of tonight she will remember wrong for the rest of her life. Was that so hard? She says to me. No, I tell her. It wasn't hard at all. Marcus is already at the door, my painting tucked under his arm like a takeout order he'll forget in the car. Behind him, in the corner, the covered canvas sits under its grey cloth, and he doesn't look at it, and Sophia doesn't look at it, and I don't either, because looking at it is the one thing that would make either of them ask. Lock up when you're done sulking, Sophia says, and then they're gone. Her heels, his laugh, the gate. The car. The quiet coming back into the room like water filling a footprint. I stand there a while. I am not sulking. I want to be clear about that, mostly for my own records. What I'm doing is watching a $50 million problem drive away for $100, in the arms of the man whose name is now attached to it, in front of the witness he brought himself. He thinks he acquired the decoration. He established possession. Those are not the same thing, and the difference is going to cost him everything he owns, and he signed for it with a laugh and a folded bill he'll never remember handing over. I pick up my phone. I find the name I need, Clara Miller, and I press call, and I sit down on the stool while it rings, because what comes next is not a thing you do standing up. It's me, I say when she answers. Sorry about the hour. I listen. Clara talks the way she always talks, unhurried, a woman who has spent 30 years telling very rich people, gently, that they are wrong about the objects they love. No, I say. Nothing's wrong. Something's actually right, for once. I need to confirm the paperwork timeline. The authentication we filed. She asks me the question I called her to ask. I close my eyes. Yes, and the submission date is on record, the original date, not tonight's. That's the one that matters. A pause while she checks. You're sure it's logged as filed, not pending. She's sure. Clara is always sure. It is the single most stressful quality a human being can have, and I have built a great deal on top of it. Good, I say. That's everything I needed. And then, because she is a friend as much as she is anything, no, not yet. Let him get comfortable first. Soon. She asks if I'm all right. It's a fair question to ask a man who just watched his wife walk his property out the door. I'm better than I've been in years, I tell her, and the strange thing is that it's true. I hang up. The studio is exactly as quiet as it was an hour ago, before my marriage functionally ended inside it. That is how I know nothing has actually changed for me. Everything that changed tonight changed for the two people driving away laughing about $100 painting. That's the strange arithmetic of it. A man can lose a wife, a painting, and the last shred of the marriage's pretense in the same 10 minutes and feel the room settle around him like nothing happened, because for him, nothing did. It started years ago. Tonight was just the part where someone finally picked it up and carried it out the door. I set the phone face down on the work table, I pick the brush back up, and I turn, finally, to the canvas I was actually working on, not the one that just left. The other one. The one in the corner nobody thought to ask about. I pull the grey cloth halfway off and stop, and I just look at it for a second, and I don't tell you what's under there, because telling you would ruin it, and Marcus and Sophia are about to find out the hard way, in a room full of people, with cameras. Then I get back to work. There is still a lot of it left to do, and for the first time in 8 years, no one is coming to ask me what it is. Part 2. The man who called it garage art. I wasn't in Marcus's apartment when he unwrapped it. I didn't have to be. There are men you can predict the way you predict a dropped glass, and Marcus Donovan is a very expensive glass. But I know how the night went, because a week later, a friend of a friend described it to me, delighted, not knowing I was the one who'd painted the thing they were laughing about. So let me tell it the way it happened. Marcus's apartment is the kind of place that tells you its own price before it tells you anything else. Furniture that matches by brand, art chosen to coordinate with the couch. He peeled the brown paper off my painting on his marble island while a friend watched, a drink already sweating a ring onto the stone. He did it slowly, the way men open a box they've already been told is a gift for them. No suspense in it, just the pleasure of confirming something he assumed. There she is, Marcus said, holding it out at arm's length. Told you, little moody thing. Works though, right? Huh. The friend leaned in, tilted his head. You know what? That reminds me of something, the way the light sits. I feel like I've seen that hand somewhere. It's a style, Marcus said, pleasant, already deciding the conversation. Everybody paints like somebody. Frankly, that's half of what art is. Frankly, the way other men clear their throat, a little runway before an opinion he's about to land, whether or not the runway is clear. No, seriously, the friend said, still looking. That hand, that's not a beginner. Whoever did this has done it 1,000 times. You don't fake that. Sure you do, Marcus said. You practice. Everyone practices. Doesn't make it a Rembrandt. He handed his friend a fresh drink, which is Marcus's way of ending a topic. Where'd you even get it? The friend asked. Guy my wife knows. Ex-husband situation, basically. Marcus waved his glass. Total charity case. Paints in a garage. I gave him $100 so he'd feel like a professional. $100 so he'd feel like a professional. I've been called worse. I've just rarely been called worse by a man holding $50 million of my work and mistaking it for a favor he did me. Garage art, Marcus said, pleased with himself, propping it against the wall. That's what I'm calling it. My garage art phase. He stepped back and squinted, doing the thing people do when they're pretending to decide but have already decided. Over the bar, I think. Or the hallway. Somewhere people slow down. It's got a whole vibe, the friend agreed, because that's what the friend was there to do. Everything in here's got a vibe, Marcus said. That's not luck, that's an eye. You either have it or you're renting it from someone who does. An eye. He said it about the room, holding the one thing in it he could not see. I've thought about that sentence more than he'll ever know. You either have it or you're renting it. Marcus, my friend, you paid $100 and a marriage for that painting, and you're about to find out exactly whose eye you were renting. Here is what it means when a man who reads value for a living brings a masterwork home and stands it next to a couch he picked for the couch's sake. It means he has never once been in a room he couldn't price, and that is a very dangerous thing to be sure of. You should see if it's worth anything, the friend said, half joking. Maybe I will, Marcus smiled. I look into things, that's the whole job. Then the friend asked the question that started it. Is it signed? Marcus turned the painting over, casual, the way you'd flip a menu. And for 1 second, his face did a small thing. His eyes stopped being lazy. Whatever was on the back of that canvas, some mark, some notation, held his attention a beat longer than a garage art face should hold anyone's. I'll have someone look at it, Marcus said. The smile stayed, but the sentence was different from the ones before it. That's the thing about a man who's never wrong. When the first wrong note comes, it doesn't sound like fear. It sounds like a schedule. Meanwhile, across town, Sophia was telling the same story, except in her version, she was the funny one. I know about the brunch because the friend she told it to is not, it turns out, as good a friend as Sophia assumed. Most people find out who their friends are during a crisis. Sophia found out over eggs. So I just took it, Sophia was saying, stirring a coffee she wasn't drinking. Walked into the garage, the studio, and told him Marcus needed art for the new place. You should have seen his face. What did his face do? The friend asked. Nothing. That's the whole point. He just stood there. 8 years and he can't even fight about a painting. Sophia laughed. I made Marcus give him $100. For his dignity. $100, the friend repeated. For his dignity, Sophia said again, like the repetition would find the joke that hadn't landed the first time. You have to understand what he's like. He'll thank me eventually. One less thing cluttering that room. She was performing me. In her version, I was softer, smaller, more grateful. She'd been editing the memory for 2 days, and it had gotten funnier and less true with each telling. The Ethan in her story just stood there and took it. The real one had told Marcus where to put the money. She'd left that out. You always leave out the part that would ruin the laugh. She was waiting for the laugh. The story was built for a laugh. She'd sanded it down, made Ethan a little more silent, a little more pathetic than he'd actually been. In her telling, I barely spoke. In her telling, I certainly didn't tell Marcus to hand the money to her. The friend didn't laugh. She set her fork down. Did he know you were taking it? She asked. Like, was it his to give? And there it was. The wrong question at the natural laugh point. It was in our house, Sophia said, too fast. Everything in that house is half mine. Do you know what I've put up with? Do you know what it's like being married to a man who, and she was off, pivoting to grievance before the question had finished landing, which is what Sophia does when a question gets too close to an answer. The friend nodded and let her talk and didn't ask anything else, but the energy at the table had already changed, and Sophia felt it the way you feel a draft without finding the window. The friend paid for her own coffee, a small thing, but Sophia noticed it, the way you notice a door that used to be open. She went home irritated. She told herself it was Ethan's fault, somehow, the way most of her irritations eventually became. And here's the thing nobody warns you about status. It runs on other people's faces. You do a thing, and you wait for the room to tell you it was clever, and usually the room agrees, and you never learn the difference between clever and confirmed. Sophia had spent years reading approval as proof. This was the first face that didn't approve, and she had no idea how to read it. And then, at 11 that night, laptop glowing on the kitchen counter, Sophia typed the title of the painting into the search bar. I don't know exactly what came up. I know she read the first line of the first result because of what happened next. She closed the laptop, she sat in the dark of her own kitchen for a minute, and then she opened it again. That's the part that matters, not the closing, the opening. She left the search there. She never cleared it. It's still in the history, a small, honest record of the first night Sophia Carter wondered if she'd made a mistake. She decided she hadn't. She's very good at deciding that, but she looked. Looking is the whole story of this part. Somewhere in a search result she didn't finish reading was a word she'd skimmed right past, a name that wasn't Ethan's. She'd remember it later, when it was too late to unread. 2 days later, Marcus did the thing that would eventually put him in a courtroom. He hired a professional. Her name doesn't matter for our purposes, she's a consultant, the kind of woman rich men keep on retainer to confirm they were right to buy the things they've already bought. Precise, expensive, not in the habit of pausing. She came to Marcus's apartment and she looked at my painting for a long time, longer than Marcus expected. She got close to the surface, then stepped back, then got close again, and she didn't narrate any of it, which unsettled him more than a bad review would have. "So," Marcus said, arms crossed, comfortable, "what are we looking at?" "I'm not sure yet," she said. "Frankly, I think the provenance is straightforward," Marcus offered. "Local guy, sold it to me directly, I'd like to make a few calls before I say anything." She didn't turn around when she said it. She was still looking at the lower corner of the canvas, at the place where a signature lives. "Is there a problem?" Marcus tried. "Because if there's a problem, I'd rather know now." "There's no problem." She finally straightened up. "There might be the opposite of a problem, which is why I want to be careful before I say a word." Marcus liked that. You could see him deciding to like it. The opposite of a problem, in his vocabulary, meant money. He didn't hear the caution in it. He heard the upside and skipped the sentence around it. "How long?" Marcus asked. She didn't answer. That was the beat. A man asks a professional how long and gets in return silence and the back of her head. And something in Marcus's comfortable evening tilted a half-inch off level. "I'll call you," she said. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, just, I'll call you." And a man used to setting the timeline of every room he walks into found himself standing in his own apartment, waiting to be called. On her own shelf, when she finally went back to her office, there was a row of reference books, and one of them had a name on the spine that would have meant everything to Marcus if he'd known to read it. A monograph, a single artist's catalog. The name was Sterling. He never looked at her shelf. Why would he? He'd already hired her to do the looking. I like efficient people. Marcus had just paid a professional to go and discover the one thing I already knew, and she was good at her job, which meant she was going to find it fast. That same afternoon, in an office across the city, Clara Miller slid a single sheet of paper across her desk to a colleague and tapped one line on it. A date, circled in blue. "That's the one that matters," she said. "Not the intake, the original." The colleague read it, nodded, and slid it back. That was the whole exchange. No drama. Just a woman confirming that a certain document had been in a certain system since a certain day, and that the day in question was not in dispute. You don't know what the paper is yet. Neither did most of the people who'd handled it. Just a filing, just a date, just the quiet machinery of an institution doing what it does. But the date on that page was older than everything Marcus was about to do. Older than the handoff, older than the $100. That's all I'll say about it for now. The consultant picked up her phone. She dialed a number I could have guessed. She waited for someone to answer. And Marcus? Marcus had gone home. He was not worried. He had a professional handling it, a painting on his wall, and a wife who thought he was clever. He had, in his own accounting, won the whole exchange for $100. The consultant wasn't going home to sleep on it. She'd seen the hand my painting was made by, and unlike Marcus's friend, she knew exactly whose hand it was. That's the difference between a vibe and a name. He'd find out what $100 actually bought him, but not yet. First, he had to make one more confident phone call, the kind of call that only a man who is certain he understands his situation would ever make. He was going to take my painting to people whose entire job is to check, and he was going to do it proudly. Part 3. The official notice. Marcus made his confident phone call, and 3 days later he got a phone call back, and those are two very different kinds of phone call. The auction house did what auction houses do. Before they put a lot on a wall for rich people to bid on, they check where it came from. Provenance, they call it. The story of an object's ownership told in paper. Marcus's agent brought him the questions in his office, and I've been told Marcus was leaning back in his chair when it started and sitting forward by the end, though he'd deny the chair ever moved. "They love the piece," the agent said first, "because you always open with the part the client wants. Genuinely, the specialist called it significant." Good, Marcus waited. He knew there was a but coming. Men like Marcus can hear a but from across a room. "They just have some questions on the provenance, the chain of ownership. They need documentation of how it came to you." "It came to me because I bought it," Marcus said. "I have the receipt." "The $100 note?" The $100 note. There was a pause on the line, the specific pause of a professional deciding how to phrase something to a man who does not like being phrased at. For a piece at this level, a handwritten note isn't going to clear their standards. They'll want provenance, prior ownership, prior sales, authentication history, where it was before your wife's, before the seller had it. And here is the moment. Here is where Marcus's face did the first honest thing it had done since he walked into my studio. It went neutral. Completely, smoothly neutral, the professional mask coming down over whatever was underneath. Marcus has spent his whole career in rooms where the man who reacts first loses, and he was not going to react. But neutral is a reaction. Neutral is what a face does when it's working very hard. He set down the pen he'd been turning over. He did not pick it up again. For the rest of that conversation, the pen just lay there on the desk, and if you want to know how Marcus Donovan was actually feeling, you didn't watch his face. You watched the pen. This is a documentation question, Marcus said. Not a problem, a documentation question. Of course. Provenance can be dress, he stopped. Started again, more careful. Provenance can be assembled, reconstructed. These things get lost and found all the time. Nobody keeps a perfect paper trail on garage art. Garage art. He was still calling it that even now, even with an auction specialist using the word significant. That's the thing about a story you've told yourself. You'll keep telling it long after the facts have left the room. What Marcus had run into for the first time in his life was an institution that kept better records than he did. He'd spent years being the best documented man in every deal. Now he was on the other side of the table from people whose entire existence is memory, and his paperwork was a $100 bill folded by his girlfriend. How long do we have before they need it? Marcus asked. They've paused the consignment. They won't catalog it until the provenance is resolved. So, as long as it takes, but the clock's not running in our favor. An unresolved flag on a piece like this doesn't age well. People talk. People always talk, Marcus said. Talking isn't proof. He was doing the thing he does, the thing that had worked in every deal of his life, reducing a problem to a smaller problem, then a smaller one, until it fit in his hand. It's a gap in a paper trail. Gaps get filled. That's all a paper trail is, a series of gaps somebody agreed to stop asking about. His agent didn't answer that, which was wise, because it wasn't the kind of thing you want on a recording, and everything an auction house touches ends up on a record somewhere. Get someone to look at the paperwork, Marcus told his agent, standing now, done with the call. Make it look cleaner. Make it look cleaner. The agent nodded. Neither of them said the word forgery. They didn't need to. That's how these things always happen, not with a villain rubbing his hands, but with a busy man using a soft verb and a nod, delegating a crime to someone who'll delegate it again. And Marcus, the agent said carefully at the door, the specialist did use the word significant. If this clears, if the provenance holds, you're not looking at a decoration anymore. You understand that? I always understood that, Marcus said, which was a lie, and the first lie he told that would matter. 3 weeks ago, it was garage art he was doing a favor to take. Now it was a significant piece he'd always known was significant. Watch how fast a man rewrites his own certainty when the number changes. He'd never once been wrong. He was simply, retroactively, always right. I found out about the auction house call the same day it happened, but not from Marcus, obviously. I found out because the painting was already in a system that told the people I'd asked to watch. And when the flag went up, one of those people sent me a very formal letter. I want to tell you about that letter, because it's the closest thing to a birthday I've had in years. It came certified, heavy paper, an institutional seal, the kind of envelope that has clearly never contained good news for anyone before me. I opened it standing at my work table with paint still wet on my hands, and I read 4 paragraphs of the most beautifully cautious language the human species has ever produced. Institutions don't write like people, they write like they're being sued in advance. The letter took 4 paragraphs and roughly 200 words to tell me something I could have said in 6. The thing I filed is on record, and the date holds. That's it, that's all it said. Submission acknowledged, authentication of record, filing date confirmed and unamended. A paragraph of rain, describing rain, to a man standing under an umbrella he built himself 3 years ago. People think revenge is loud. They picture a speech, a slammed door, a room full of people gasping. But the truest revenge I've ever tasted arrived by certified mail in language so boring it could put a jury to sleep. There's no music under it. There's just a date, holding. I read it twice. And then I did the thing I almost never let myself do. I smiled. Not for anyone, there was no one there to see it, which is the only reason it happened. It was the smile of a man who set a very slow trap a long time ago, in the dark, with no guarantee anyone would ever step in it, and then heard, faintly, the sound of a door closing somewhere down the hall. Filing date confirmed and unamended, I said out loud, to the empty studio, just to hear how it sounded. It sounded like money. It sounded like a marriage I no longer had to pretend about. It sounded like the exact center of a plan. Here's what the letter meant, in the plainest terms I can give you, and I'll only say it once. Before Sophia ever walked that painting out of my studio, its real identity and its real value were already recorded, dated, and locked into a system, under a name. Whatever Marcus does now, whoever he hires, whatever paper he manufactures, he is building his house on top of a date he can't move. He just doesn't know the date exists. I folded the letter along its crease. I opened the second drawer of my work table and I put it inside, on top of the others. Not hidden, just put away, the way you put away a tool you're finished with for now, but will absolutely need again. Then I went back to the canvas in the corner, because a smile is a nice thing, but it doesn't finish a painting, and I had one left to finish. While I was smiling in my studio, Sophia was in a lawyer's office learning that her favorite sentence didn't work. Her favorite sentence was, "I didn't know." She'd been rehearsing it since the night she Googled the title. I didn't know it was worth anything. It has the shape of a defense. It feels like a shield. It is, legally, closer to a confession. "I understand you didn't know," her divorce attorney said, and Sophia relaxed for exactly 1 second before the sentence continued. "But intent isn't the question. The question is whether the transfer happened. And it did." "So he can't touch me," Sophia said. "I genuinely believed it was clutter. Nobody could have known." "He could have known," the attorney said. "In fact, if I'm reading the situation correctly, he did." That landed somewhere Sophia wasn't ready for. She'd built her whole story on the idea that the painting was worthless and everyone had agreed it was worthless. The possibility that one person in the marriage had known exactly what it was and had let her carry it out the door anyway was a door into a much colder room, and she stepped back from it. "It was in our house," Sophia said. "It was marital property. Half of it's mine." "Then you transferred an asset that was, at best, half yours, to a third party for $100, without a valuation and without his consent to the sale. If it turns out to be worth what people are starting to say it's worth, none of the words in that sentence are on your side." Sophia opened her mouth. The attorney, who had clearly given this speech to smarter people than Sophia, got there first. Not knowing what something is worth doesn't make giving it away legal. It just makes it a worse decision. It takes real skill to be that gentle and that final in the same breath. I'd have almost enjoyed watching it if it hadn't been my painting they were discussing. "Do you have documentation of the transfer?" the attorney asked. "Anything in writing? Something that shows it was a sale, that it was consensual, that the price was agreed?" And Sophia remembered the receipt. She'd written one. That night in the studio before Marcus took the painting, no, after, she was suddenly not sure when. But she'd written something, a little note, a scrap, and she was fairly certain she'd kept it, because Sophia keeps the things that make her look organized. "I have a receipt," she said. "I'll find it." She went home and opened her desk drawer, the top right one, where she puts the things she wants to be able to produce later. It wasn't there. She checked the drawer below it, the one below that. Her purse, she'd had it in her purse, maybe, that night, with the $100 bill. The $100 bill she also could not now find, because she'd never looked at it, because she dropped it in without looking, and things you don't look at are things you lose. She pulled the drawer all the way out and set it on the desk, and went through it item by item. Old cards, a spare charger, a warranty for a blender, the small archaeology of a life she'd thought was organized. No receipt. She tried to remember writing it, and this is the part that unsettled her most. She couldn't. She could remember deciding to write one. She could remember the intention, clean and sensible. She could not actually remember the pen on the paper. Had she written it, or had she only meant to, in the version of that night she'd been retelling until it became smooth? She went back to the top drawer and checked it again, more slowly, as if the receipt might have been shy the first time. Empty. She didn't cry. She didn't slam anything. She just stood there with her hand on the drawer, and then she slid it closed, quietly. And that quiet closing was the loudest sound Sophia made all week. The drawer where the proof should have been. Shut on nothing. That same evening, in a studio across the city, I made a phone call. It was short. The person on the other end had been waiting for it. "It's Ethan," I said. "I need you to pull the filing, the original one. The filing reference is..." And that's where I'll leave it. Because you're not supposed to hear the rest yet. Any more than Marcus was. Any more than Sophia was. There's a number, and it points at a document, and the document points at a date, and the date ends all of this. But not tonight. Tonight, I just gave the first 3 words of a reference number to a person I trust, and hung up, and nodded once at nothing in particular. Somewhere across the city, a man was paying to have paperwork made cleaner, and a woman was staring at an empty drawer, and I was standing in a studio that smelled like turpentine, holding a phone, more certain than I have ever been of anything in my life. Part V4. The phone call he thinks is routine. The worst thing Marcus ever did, he did in under 2 minutes, sitting down with a coffee going cold at his elbow. That's the part people never believe. They want a crime to look like a crime. It almost never does. I wasn't on the call, but I know what a man like Marcus sounds like when he's committing a felony, because a man like Marcus sounds exactly the same as when he's ordering lunch. That's the whole talent. The voice never changes, only the thing underneath it does. He'd already decided the auction house's provenance question was administrative, a gap in a form, and Marcus had spent 20 years learning that gaps in forms are things you pay someone to fill. So he paid someone. "It's a transfer document," he said into the phone, leaning back. "Nothing complicated. I needed to read like a standard private sale. Clean chain, prior ownership represented properly, the kind of thing a house wants to see." He listened for a second. Whatever the person on the other end asked, Marcus waved it away with his tone. "Because the existing paperwork is thin," he said. "That's the whole point. Make it not thin. Date it appropriately, make the representations complete, and I don't need to know the mechanics. You handle the mechanics. That's what I pay for." Date it appropriately. 4 ordinary words. He said them the way you'd say, "salt the rim." He had no idea he'd just handed a prosecutor the center of a case. The person on the other end must have asked something careful then, a real question, the kind a professional asks when they want it on record that they asked. You could tell by the way Marcus's patience thinned. "I'm not asking you to invent anything," Marcus said, which is the exact sentence people say immediately before asking someone to invent something. "The sale happened. I own the piece. All I want is for the paper to reflect the reality cleanly. If the reality is messy, tidy it. That's not a moral question. It's a formatting question." A formatting question. I have to hand it to him. In 8 words, he turned a felony into a font choice. "The date should sit comfortably before the auction inquiry," he added. "Obviously, a document created in response to a provenance question isn't worth the paper, so don't make it look like a response. Make it look like it was always there. Make it look like it was always there." And with that instruction, Marcus Donovan reached into the past and tried to plant a document in it, in the one medium on earth where the past leaves fingerprints. "Right," Marcus said. "Standard private sale. Send it when it's done." And he hung up. He did not say the word forgery. He never said it, not once, not in that call or any call after. Men like Marcus don't commit crimes. They resolve documentation questions. The language is the whole defense, right up until the moment it becomes the whole confession. Here is what Marcus did not know, and it is the single most expensive thing he did not know in his entire life. The painting he was manufacturing paperwork for had already been entered, weeks earlier, before Sophia ever touched it, into a system that records exactly what a thing is and exactly when that record was made. There was already a date attached to that painting, a real one, locked, unamendable. And Marcus had just ordered a second date, a fake one, to sit on top of the real one. In a medium where the paper itself can be tested, the ink, the fibers, the age of the thing, Marcus spent his whole career in finance, where a document is whatever everyone agrees it is. He'd wandered into the art world, where a document is a physical object with a lifespan, and forensics can read that lifespan like rings on a tree. He was applying paperwork logic to a place with a memory. That's the mistake that only looks reasonable if you have never once been wrong in a medium that keeps receipts. Marcus had never been wrong anywhere, so of course he was confident. Confidence, it turns out, is just the feeling of not yet knowing which room you're standing in. He set the phone face down on the desk. He glanced across the room at my painting, leaning against the wall where he'd propped it a week ago, still waiting for its spot over the bar. He didn't feel a thing. He picked his coffee back up and got on with his day. The forensic clock had just started. He couldn't hear it. Nobody can hear a clock they don't believe exists. And here's the part I find almost tender, in a cold way. Marcus didn't have to do this. If he'd walked away, kept the painting on his wall as garage art, never chased the sale, never hired the consultant, never ordered the paper, none of what's coming would touch him. He was safe. He made himself unsafe, one confident decision at a time, chasing a number. I didn't set the trap. I just filed the document and declined to warn the man walking toward it. While Marcus was making the worst call of his life, Sophia was waiting for a call that wasn't coming. She'd left him a message the day before, then another. She was in that particular limbo you enter when the person you've bet everything on stops speaking up, and you're still telling yourself there's a good reason, because the alternative is a math you're not ready to do. Then her phone rang and the screen lit up, and it wasn't Marcus's name. It was a number she didn't recognize, and when she answered it, expecting, hoping, it was him calling from somewhere new, a calm professional voice said it was calling on behalf of Mr. Hayes. His lawyer. Marcus had sent his lawyer. "We're coordinating the legal response to the provenance matter," the voice said. Smooth, rehearsed, not unkind, which was somehow worse. As part of that, your account of the transaction may need to be formalized. We'd want to make sure everyone's description of events is consistent. Consistent. Sophia heard the word and something in the back of her mind, some animal part that keeps working while the rest of her is in denial, flinched at it. Is Marcus there? She asked. Can I talk to Marcus? Mr. Hayes has asked me to handle communications on this matter for now. It's cleaner that way. I'm sure you understand. Cleaner. That word again. Everyone in Marcus's orbit had started using it, clean it up, cleaner that way, as if the whole situation were a spill, and Sophia was slowly realizing which part of the spill she was. I need to understand what I'm being asked to formalize, Sophia said, and to her credit she tried to sound like a woman with leverage. I gave a painting to Marcus. That's all that happened. I don't see why that needs lawyers. Then this will be very simple, the lawyer said, in the tone of a person for whom nothing is ever very simple. We'll be in touch. In the meantime, it would be best if you didn't discuss the transaction with third parties, for everyone's protection. For everyone's protection, meaning Marcus's. Sophia had been married long enough to another man to know the difference between being protected and being contained, and some cold part of her filed the call under the second one. She said she understood. She's very good at saying she understands. She hung up before she could hear herself say anything she'd have to take back. Then she called Marcus. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She hung up without leaving a message the first time, because the first time she still thought he might just be in a meeting. She called again. Voicemail. This time she left one. Marcus, it's me. Call me back. I just got a strange call and I want to know what's going on. Okay, call me. Calm. Reasonable. The voice of a woman who is managing. She waited 11 minutes. She watched the phone the way you watch a kettle. She called a third time. Voicemail again. His recorded voice bright and busy, promising to get right back to her. A promise that was already a lie by the time she heard it. And this time, when the tone sounded, she opened her mouth and she meant to say something sharp, something that would make him call. And instead, she stopped. Because there was nothing to say that wouldn't reveal how much she already knew. So she just ended the call. 3 outgoing calls on her screen. None returned. She scrolled up through the thread of the last few weeks, his old messages, the ones from before, when he answered in seconds, when she was the interesting thing in his day. She read them the way you reread a good review of a restaurant that has since closed. Same words, different world. There's a name in Marcus's world for what he'd just done, having your lawyer call your partner before you do. They call it managing exposure. In every other part of the human world it has a shorter name, and Sophia was 3 unanswered calls into learning it. She put the phone face down on the table. She didn't know it yet, but she just made a gesture that mattered, the small, defeated turning away of a phone that isn't going to ring. She thought she was the one being left. She had no idea she was rehearsing. That same afternoon I was in my attorney's office and nothing happened. I want to be precise about that, because the nothing was the entire point. There was a folder on the table between us. Plain, manila, the kind you'd walk past 1,000 times without a glance. It sat there the whole meeting and neither of us opened it. We didn't need to. Everything in that folder had already been done, weeks ago, correctly, and the folder full of finished work doesn't need to be opened. It just needs to exist, and to be in the right hands when the time comes. I need you to confirm the filing date, my attorney said. The original submission, not the acknowledgement, the submission. I gave her the date. I gave her the reference. She wrote 1 line on a legal pad and underlined it once, and that underline was the most dramatic gesture in the entire room. And you're comfortable, she said, that nothing about the pre-filing has been amended, updated, or resubmitted, because the whole thing rests on it being older than everything that comes after it? It hasn't been touched since the date was made, I said. That's the point of it. I made it so I'd never have to touch it again. Good, because the strength of your position isn't that you're right. She set the pen down. Plenty of people are right and lose. The strength of your position is that you did the paperwork first, and you did it correctly, and you did it before anyone had a reason to. Judges love a person who was careful before it was convenient. I wasn't being careful, I said. I was being married. There's a difference, and it isn't flattering to either of us. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Lawyers ration their smiles like they're paying for them personally. When this moves, she said, it's going to move at your speed, not his. He'll want to rush to a sale to realize the value. Every step he takes toward that sale is a step deeper into a filing he doesn't know exists. So we don't stop him. We don't warn him. We let the record fill in around him. That's the plan, I said. I'm very good at letting people finish what they started. She nodded. She didn't write that part down. Some things you write down and some things you just believe, and a good lawyer knows which is which. I watched her not open the folder, and I thought about Marcus somewhere across town, paying good money to manufacture a piece of paper. Marcus treats a document like a number in a spreadsheet, a value you can adjust if you have the authority. He was about to learn that in this world the document is a body, and bodies have a time of death, and you cannot argue a corpse into being younger than it is. "Anything else I should know?" my attorney asked. "He's going to fight it," I said. "When it lands, he's going to fight it hard, and he's going to spend a lot of money, and every dollar he spends is going to make it worse for him. Don't stop him. Let him build." She looked at me for a second, then she said, "You know he's going to forge something, don't you, to close the provenance gap?" "He already has," I said. "He just doesn't know I filed first." I stood up. I didn't take the folder. It wasn't mine to carry. It lived here now, in a lawyer's office, in a locked drawer, waiting. I said goodbye and I left, unhurried, a man with nowhere he needed to be, because everything that needed doing had been done a long time ago. Behind me, my attorney looked at the folder on the table. She did not open it either. She picked up her phone and made one short call, and I didn't hear a word of it, and I didn't need to. And across the city, Sophia picked her phone back up off the table because she couldn't help it, and she dialed the last number that had called her. Not Marcus, Marcus's lawyer. She was going to talk to the lawyer, because the lawyer was all she had left of the man now. And that right there, was the moment she stopped being Marcus's partner and became a loose end he was managing. We don't hear that call. We just see her dial it. A woman calling a stranger to ask about the man who stopped answering, holding a phone to her ear in an empty room, waiting to be told what her own life was about to do to her. Part 5. The flag on the screen. There's a room at every serious auction house that the public never sees. No velvet, no gavels. Just screens and coffee rings and people whose entire job is to make sure the thing on the wall is what the paperwork says it is. That's where it started for real, not with a confrontation, with a specialist at a desk, running a routine check she'd run 10,000 times on a Tuesday before lunch. She had the paintings file open, Marcus's painting, my painting. She entered the authentication reference into the system, the way you'd scan a barcode, expecting nothing, because you almost always get nothing. She got something. A flag came up on her screen, red or bordered, or however that particular system marks the moment a piece of art stops being a lot in a catalog and becomes a legal event. A match against a registry, a filed dispute, a notice that this object had a story attached to it that nobody in the building had been told. She read it once. Then she read it again, because you always read it again. And then she did the only thing there was to do. "Hey," she said to the colleague at the next desk, not loudly, "can you come look at something?" He rolled his chair over. He read the screen. He didn't say anything either. There are moments in an institution where two professionals just quietly agree, without a word, that the thing they're looking at is above both their pay grades and needs to go up the chain immediately. "That's a registry match," he said finally. "On a lot we're cataloging this month?" "On a lot we've already photographed for the catalog," she said. "The consignor's coming in Thursday to discuss reserve." "Then somebody needs to call the consignor's people before Thursday." "Somebody needs to call our director before anybody calls anybody," she said, and that was the correct answer, and she reached for the phone. That's the whole moment, no music, no gasp. A professional woman in a quiet room reading a line on a screen and reaching, slowly, for a telephone. If you ever want to know what the end of someone's plan looks like, it looks like that. It looks like paperwork keeping its promise. I wasn't in the room. I've never been in any of the rooms where the important things landed. That's not modesty, it's design. I did the loud part years ago, alone. In the quiet, I filed the truth, dated it, and locked it. And then I spent all this time letting other people walk into it on their own schedule. Because here's the thing most people get wrong about winning. They plan for things to go their way. That's hoping. It needs luck, and luck is a coin. What I did instead was read the situation correctly, once, earlier than everyone else, and then arrange things so I didn't need luck at all. I didn't need it to go my way. I needed it to go exactly the way it was always going to go. And it did. People think revenge is a fire. It isn't. Revenge, done properly, is a filing cabinet. It's boring, it's patient, it's a piece of paper sitting in a system for years being absolutely correct while the person you filed it against builds a life on top of it. And then one Tuesday a stranger runs a routine check and the paper you wrote in the dark stands up and speaks in a voice no lawyer can talk over. The specialist made her call. Her posture changed while she talked, straighter, more careful, the body language of a person who has just realized the afternoon is going to be longer than she planned. And while she was still on the phone, a woman she recognized was already walking across the office toward her, unhurried, a book under one arm. Clara Miller. the most respected authenticator in the building, and, though almost no one alive knew it, the one person in the art world who knew both of my names. Clara did not come to the auction house for me. I want to be clear about that, because it matters more than anything else in this story. She came because it was her job. A flagged piece needs an independent authority to confirm what it is, and Clara is the independent authority they call. She was not doing me a favor. She was protecting the integrity of her own work and her own institution. That's exactly why her word is a wall no lawyer can climb, because she has no stake in me, and every stake in being right. They sat in the director's office, Clara and the man who ran the house, and I was there too, off to the side, in a chair by the wall, because the registry flag named me as the reporting party and the house wanted the reporting party present. Nobody in that room but Clara knew that the reporting party and the artist were the same person. That's a strange thing, to sit quietly in a room while people discuss you in the third person and get the pronouns technically right and everything else wrong. Clara put the book on the director's desk. A professional catalog, the kind of reference only specialists own, thick, dog-eared, expensive. She opened it to a page she'd clearly opened many times before. She turned it around so it faced the director and she put one finger on a single line of text. A name. "This is the hand," she said. "This painting is consistent with a sterling provenance record in every respect I can test. Ground, technique, signature placement, the work's catalogued here. If your consignor is claiming a clean private sale provenance, your consignor has a problem because this piece is already documented and the documentation predates his." That was it. That was the whole speech. Clara does not give speeches. She points at a name and tells you the truth and lets the truth do the heavy lifting. "Explain it to me like I have to explain it to a board," the director said. He was not a stupid man. Stupid men don't run auction houses. He just needed it in a shape he could repeat under pressure. "Your consignor brought you a painting with $100 bill of sale," Clara said. "That's not provenance, that's a receipt from a garage. When your people pushed for real provenance, a document appeared. A clean private sale history, very tidy." She tapped the book. "The problem is that the piece it describes is this piece, and this piece is already in the record, under this name, with a date. Your tidy new document is younger than the thing it claims to be older than. I don't need to prove that. The paper will prove it itself, the moment anyone tests it. You're saying the provenance he supplied is fabricated. I'm saying I authenticate paintings, not accusations. What I can tell you is that the authentic record already exists, and it isn't his. What that makes his document is a question for someone with a badge, not me." The director looked down at the page. He read the name, K. Hampton. He read it the way you read a word that is about to reorganize your week. Then he looked up, not at me, thank God. He had no reason to look at me. And he picked up his own phone. And I sat in my chair by the wall and I did not react. The name of my own secret life was said out loud, twice, in a room 3 feet from me, and my face did nothing at all. It's the second time in my career I've watched someone hear the name Sterling and reach immediately for a telephone. I've been in the room for neither reaction in any way that counted, which is, as I keep saying, convenient. You want to know why I paint under a name that isn't mine? Because a name is a door, and I wanted one door nobody in my own house had the key to. Sophia married a man named on a mailbox. She never once wondered if there was another man signing the corners of the canvases she wouldn't look at. Why would she? She'd already decided who I was, and people rarely check a decision that comfortable. The director asked one careful question, whether the consignor had been informed. Clara told him that wasn't her department, gathered her things, and I watched a room full of professionals begin, very politely, to build a paper trail around a man who thought he was the only one in the story who understood paper. "For now," the director said carefully, "this stays a provenance hold, not an accusation. We freeze the lot, we notify the consignor's representatives, we do everything by the book, and the book protects us." He was already thinking about liability, about his house's name, about the very rich people who need to believe this building is a safe place to leave a fortune on the wall. "The last thing we want is to be the ones who called it fraud out loud." "You won't have to," Clara said, standing. "He'll do that part himself. Men like that always insist on their innocence loudly enough to prove the opposite." Somewhere out there, Marcus was about to get a phone call telling him the auction was on hold and his painting was in a dispute record and the word provenance now had teeth. He would fight it. Of course he'd fight it. A man who has never been wrong doesn't stop at the first evidence that he is. He doubles the bet. His name was in the record now. He couldn't quietly walk away from the painting without walking away from the claim, and Marcus Donovan has never walked away from a claim in his life. Clara gathered her book and her notes. At the door, she paused and said one more thing to the director, quietly, that I didn't quite catch. He nodded once. Then she left, and she did not look at me on the way out, because looking at me was the one thing that would have told the room we knew each other, and Clara Miller does not make that kind of mistake. Winning, it turns out, is mostly a series of people not looking at each other correctly. Now, I'd love to tell you all of this cost me nothing. It cost me plenty. That same week, my studio went under asset inventory. Divorce does that. Before anyone can divide a marriage, someone with a clipboard comes and writes down everything you own, and until they're finished, you can't sell, move, or breathe on any of it. So I stood in my own studio and watched a polite official in a lanyard document my entire working life, one item at a time, with the thoroughness of a man counting grains of rice. Title of this one? He asked, pen ready. It doesn't have one. Approximate date? Last spring. Medium? Oil. Estimated value? That's your job, not mine, I said. I just make them. He wrote something down. I'd love to know what number a man in a lanyard puts next to a painting when the artist declines to guess. Probably the same number he'd write for a nice print. That's the whole joke of my life in one clipboard entry, the gap between what I'm assumed to be worth and what I am. 3 words at a time. That's about the level of conversation an asset inventory deserves. He wrote everything down, carefully, in the wrong order of importance, the way processes always do, cataloging the brushes and missing the point, measuring the frames and never once asking the only question that mattered. Because the most valuable object in that room was about 4 feet to his left, under a grey cloth, and it wasn't on his list. It had never been. Publicly identified, never shown, never named, which meant, as far as the process was concerned, it did not exist. The single most efficient decision I have made in months was made 3 years ago, when I decided not to tell anyone what I was working on. I thought about the fact that this inventory existed at all because of a machine I'd set running years ago. The filing that flagged the painting was the same legal thread that reached back and froze my own studio. I'd built a system honest enough to catch Marcus, and an honest system doesn't make exceptions for the man who built it. I was paying, in inconvenience, for the privilege of being right. I've paid worse for less. He worked his way down the wall, canvas by canvas, and eventually he reached the covered one, and he paused, the way people do near a covered thing, some animal part of them knowing there's a face under there. Anything else in here I should note? He asked. I looked at the covered canvas. $50 million, give or take, standing quietly in the corner of a room, a man in a lanyard was inventorying for a divorce. No, I said. I didn't look at him when I said it. I looked at the cloth. And then he moved on and wrote down a box of turpentine, and the most important word I said all month was a single no, aimed at nothing anyone would ever check. While I was lying, gently, to a clipboard, Sophia was learning fear at her desk. Her office is open plan, that modern cruelty where everyone can see everyone's screen if they lean the right way. She was at her desk when the email came in, and the subject line had her full name in it, and under her full name, the name of Marcus's law firm. She saw it land. She felt, more than saw, a colleague slow down behind her on the way to the printer. And Sophia did the thing you do when your private catastrophe shows up on a screen in a room full of coworkers. She angled the monitor, casually, like she was just adjusting the glare, a small human doomed gesture, turning a screen a few degrees to hide a life that has stopped being private. The colleague who'd slowed down behind her didn't say anything. That was almost worse. A month ago, someone would have leaned over and asked, warm and nosy, what's that about? Now they just read the subject line, kept walking, and would talk about it somewhere Sophia couldn't hear. She'd become a subject line. That's a specific kind of loneliness, and she'd built it herself. One clever decision at a time, exactly the way Marcus built his. She didn't open the email for a full minute. She sat there with her name and a law firm glowing in front of her, in a room full of people who liked her, or had, and she understood for the first time, all the way down, that this was not going to stay a story she got to tell at brunch. When she finally read it, it wasn't a threat. That was the frightening part. It was courteous. It asked her to make herself available to confirm certain details of the transaction and to understand that her account and Mr. Hayes' account should ideally not diverge. She read that line twice. Should not diverge. As if the truth were a road they could agree to take together, if only she'd cooperate. It had a filing date now. And the filing date, she would soon learn, was older than the night she carried my painting out the door. She opened the email. And whatever was in it, her face did the math she'd been avoiding for weeks, the cold arithmetic of a woman realizing that, I didn't know, had never been a shield. It was just a description of exactly how little she'd understood about the man she left, and the things she gave away, and the trap she'd carried across the room in her own 2 hands. Part 6. The One Sentence. Marcus did what men like Marcus always do when a wall appears in front of them. He hired more men to argue that the wall wasn't there. His lawyers moved to challenge the registry flag. On paper, it was a smart play. If you can't sell the painting because of a dispute record, you attack the dispute record. Argue it was filed wrong, filed late, filed by someone without standing. Knock out the flag and the painting is clean again. So there was a hearing, a formal one, in a plain room with a long table and a person from the registry authority taking notes. The kind of room where fortunes change hands and nobody raises their voice. I wasn't there. I want to keep saying that because it's the whole point of how I built this. I have never once had to be in the room where it counted. I did my part years ago, in the dark, alone. Everything since has just been other people meeting my paperwork. Marcus was there though. He sat behind his lawyer, silent, watchful, in a very good suit, wearing the expression of a man who has paid for the best and expects it to work. His lead attorney was good. I'll give the man that. He stood and he made a careful, clean argument. Chain of custody, timing, procedural adequacy. He suggested the registry filing was premature. He suggested the documentation supporting it was thin. He suggested, without quite saying it, that this whole thing was one artist's grievance dressed up as an institutional record. The filing in question, the attorney said, was submitted by a party with an obvious personal interest in the outcome, the seller's estranged spouse's associate. That alone should give this body pause. A registry flag is a serious instrument. It should not be available as a weapon in a divorce. He let that sit. It was a good line. It reframed the whole thing as a bitter ex-husband abusing the system, which is a story everyone in that room had seen before, and stories you've seen before are easy to believe. We're not asking you to rule on the painting, he went on. We're asking you to recognize that the process here was irregular. Remove the flag. Let the market and the proper authorities sort out attribution in the ordinary course. Our client bought a painting in good faith, with a bill of sale, and he is being held hostage by a filing that would not survive 10 minutes of real scrutiny. It was a well-built argument. It had a beginning, a middle, and a place where the crowd was supposed to nod. A few people in the room did nod, faintly. That's how good it was. For about 90 seconds, Marcus's version of events was winning, and across the table sat Clara Miller, who has spent 30 years in rooms exactly like this one, listening to well-built arguments, and who was not nodding. When the attorney finished, when he reached the part where the other side is supposed to look worried, Clara did not look worried. She waited a bit, the way she does, and then she said one sentence. I won't tell you exactly what it was, partly because you're not supposed to have it yet, mostly because the sentence itself matters less than what it did. It referenced the authentication record, the one she had processed herself, on a date that predated everything Marcus's lawyer had just described. And he ended with two words she said slowly, looking directly at the attorney, not at the room. The registry filing was submitted and dated well before your client ever saw this painting, she said, evenly. So whatever interest anyone has in the outcome now is irrelevant to a record that already existed then. If this body wants to question anyone's paperwork, I'd respectfully suggest it start with the transfer document your client supplied, because I've examined both and only one of them has a problem with its document integrity. Document integrity, she said again, slower, in case anyone had missed which document she meant. She did not explain them, she did not need to. Because Marcus's attorney was a smart man, and a smart man hears the phrase document integrity aimed at a document his client manufactured last month, and he understands, in the space of a breath, that there is a cliff at the end of this road and his client has been cheerfully driving toward it. The attorney looked down at his notes. That's the whole payoff. A man in an excellent suit, mid-argument, suddenly finding his own legal pad more interesting than the room. He did not pick the argument back up. He said something about reviewing the filing and reserving his position, which is lawyer for, I need to go have a conversation with my client that I'm not looking forward to. Marcus leaned forward and said something into his attorney's ear. I'd have paid money to hear it, but I can guess the shape, the sound of a client demanding that his expensive man do the thing he was paid to do, and the expensive man declining, quietly, because you cannot argue a document into being older than it is, and every extra minute spent trying just deepens the hole on the record. The registry official made one notation. The challenge was entered and denied. Marcus's name was now in the record twice, once as the man disputing the painting and once as the man who tried and failed to make the dispute go away. I heard about all of this afterward, secondhand, the way I hear about everything. And I'll admit I did a little math when I did. Marcus bought my painting for $100. He's now paying a team of attorneys something in the neighborhood of 1,000 times that per week to argue about it. As an investment, it is not performing. Even Marcus, who has made a career of buying low, would have to concede that a $100 acquisition now generating 5-figure weekly legal bills is not the kind of return you put in a brochure. He walked out of that hearing a different man than he walked in. I know this because of the phone call. But before I tell you about the phone call, I have to tell you about Sophia, because the same week Marcus's lawyer discovered the word integrity, Sophia discovered something worse. She discovered a name. She was at her desk, open plan office, that fishbowl of a room where privacy is a rumor. And the disputed painting had, by now, become a small item in the art world, a bulletin, a note in the kind of newsletter that people in that world actually read. The story of a significant work, frozen at auction, tangled in a provenance fight. Someone must have sent it to her, or she'd set an alert, because it arrived on her phone while she was pretending to work. And she read it. And in the third paragraph, in the dry language these bulletins use, there was a name. The painting, it said, matched authentication records associated with Kay Hampton. Sophia read the name and felt nothing at first, because it meant nothing to her. Kay Hampton. Not a name from her life. Not a name from her marriage. A stranger's name, attached to her painting, her ex-husband's garage art, in a sentence that used words like significant and authenticated and record. So she did what anyone does. She searched it. And here is where her afternoon quietly came apart, because Kay Hampton was not a nobody. Kay Hampton was in museum catalogs. M. Sterling had authenticated works that hung in places Sophia had visited on vacation and posted photos in front of. Kay Hampton was a real, credentialed, respected figure in a world Sophia had always assumed her husband was too small to enter. There were no photographs. That was strange, and she noticed it without knowing why it mattered. Pages of citations, references, attributions, a whole career, and not one picture of the person. M. Sterling was everywhere in the record and nowhere in an image, a name that did work and never showed a face. Sophia scrolled and scrolled, and the more she found, the less it fit into the box she'd built for her own life. She had spent 8 years being the important one in her marriage, the one with the job, the salary, the friends, the taste. She had transferred the painting away from a man she decided was a decorative failure, and now a bulletin was calmly telling her that the painting was tied to a name that curators cited, and she could not make the two facts share a room. She didn't connect it, not yet. That's the part that would come later, in a different room, on a worse day. For now, she just stared at a name she didn't recognize, attached to a painting she'd given away for $100, and felt the specific vertigo of realizing that there was an entire architecture underneath the situation that she had never once suspected was there. "You okay?" A colleague, passing, coffee in hand, glancing down at her. "Yes," Sophia said. She did not look up from the phone. She did not move her eyes off the screen. "Yeah, fine." She was not fine. She was a woman holding a phone very tightly at a desk in a room full of people, reading about a stranger who seemed, impossibly, to be standing exactly where her husband had always stood, and she could not yet see his face in it. And some part of her already knew that when she finally did, it was going to be the worst moment of her life. The initial. That was the piece that kept snagging her. Kay Hampton. Just an initial, the way you'd shorten a first name you didn't want to say all the way. She knew a name that started with that letter. Everyone knew that name. It was on a mailbox she'd shared for 8 years. She told herself it was a coincidence. Common letter. Common enough name. She told herself that firmly, the way you say a thing you're afraid is true. She put the phone face down on the desk. She lasted about 4 seconds. Then she picked it back up, because she wasn't done, because you're never done once you've started pulling that particular thread. She kept reading. The name kept not being a stranger's. She just couldn't prove it yet. And me? I was in my studio, being poor. That's the part of a revenge story nobody films. Being right is expensive. My studio was frozen under inventory, which meant I couldn't sell a thing, which meant no income, while the legal invoices came in with the grim regularity of tides. I sat at my work table with the actual paper, the fee statements, the retainer drawdowns, the little running total that only ever ran one direction. I added it up. I'm good with numbers. It's part of the job nobody thinks I have. The number I arrived at was not a comfortable one. I called my attorney to confirm a timeline because I like to know exactly how long I'm going to be uncomfortable. "Realistically," she said, "several more months, possibly longer if he keeps fighting, and he'll keep fighting. Men like this always pay more to lose slowly than they'd pay to lose fast." "Understood," I said. "Keep the meter running. It's running worse on his side than mine." I looked around the studio while she talked. Frozen. Every canvas on the wall, a thing I couldn't sell, tagged and inventoried, my whole livelihood held still by the same legal machinery that was slowly closing around Marcus. You don't get to freeze his world without freezing your own. I'd known that going in. Knowing it and living it are different rooms. I thought about the covered canvas in the corner, the one thing in here worth more than the building, sitting quietly outside every inventory, every freeze, every fee. It could have ended all of this in an afternoon. One phone call, one reveal, and the money problem disappears. And I left it under its cloth because ending it early would mean ending it small, and I did not go through 8 years of being called garage art to settle small. I hung up and I looked at my number again, and here's the joke I told myself, alone at that table, because someone had to. From a billing standpoint, being completely right about something is indistinguishable from being in a dispute about something. The invoices don't know which one you are. Justice, it turns out, bills by the hour just like everything else. I could afford it. Barely for now, but I could. That's another thing nobody knew about the man in the paint-stained shirt, that he'd built a cushion, quietly, over years, for exactly this kind of long, expensive patience. Sophia married a man she thought had nothing. She never noticed it spent a decade preparing to be able to afford to lose everything, if that's what it took to do this properly. Across the city, Marcus stood in a hallway outside that hearing room with his phone pressed to his ear, and he was talking fast and low, in a voice I'd never heard him use, in sentences that had gotten short. Marcus used to speak in full paragraphs. He used to finish other people's sentences for them. Now he was down to fragments. Just handle it. No, today. I don't care what it costs. The confident man who called my life garage art was still in there somewhere, but his sentences had started to come apart, and when a man like Marcus loses his grammar, it means he's finally started to be afraid. He didn't know the worst was still coming. He thought this was the fight. He had no idea it was still just the part where he found out there was going to be a fight. Part 7. The date on the printout. Everything I built came down, in the end, to 2 dates and a red pen. That's the whole case. 2 numbers on a piece of paper, and the fact that one of them came before the other. The forensic report landed on a Thursday. I know because my attorney called me that evening, and I could hear, under her careful professional calm, the specific satisfaction of a person who has just watched a plan work exactly the way she was promised it would. I wasn't in the room. Of course I wasn't. But I know how it went, beat by beat, because a thing like this only goes one way. They gathered in a conference room of the main proceeding, Marcus's attorney, my representative, a neutral official, a forensic examiner with a folder, and Marcus himself, at the end of the table, in another very good suit that was starting to look like a costume. The examiner didn't make a speech. Forensics people never do. They put the report on the table and they let the paper talk. "I'll keep this to the finding," the examiner said, which is the most beautiful sentence a technical person can say, because it means they are about to skip everything except the part that ends someone's life as they knew it. The transfer document submitted by the consignor was not created in the period it represents. The materials are inconsistent with the stated date. In my professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of certainty, this document was produced recently. Recently. One word, and the room changed temperature. Everyone there understood what recently meant next to a document that claimed to be years old. There was a printout. On the printout, a date, circled, once, in red. The date the transfer document had actually been created. The real one, pulled from the bones of the thing itself, the way you can read the true age of anything if you know where to look. My representative slid a second sheet next to it. The registry filing date, also a date, earlier than the first by a clear, undeniable margin. Then he did the only thing that needed doing. He put one finger on the red circled date and one finger on the filing date, and he looked at Marcus's attorney, and he said nothing at all. Because that was the entire argument. The document Marcus swore proved he'd owned the painting cleanly for years, had been born after the theft was already on record. It claimed to be old. The paper itself said it was new. You cannot argue with a corpse about its own time of death, and Marcus had spent good money manufacturing a corpse. I'd known that date for months. I knew it before the examiner confirmed it, before the red circle, before the recess. Waiting for an institution to formally verify something you already know for certain is a strange, tedious patience, like watching a very slow clock creep toward an hour you set yourself. You know what time it's going to say, you just have to sit there while it gets there. Marcus's attorney read the 2 dates. He read them twice, the way people do when they're hoping the second read fixes the first. It didn't. "We'd like to request a recess," he said. And there it was, the whole part. A good lawyer does not ask for a recess when he's winning. He asks for a recess when he has just realized he needs to go into a hallway and tell his client that the ground is gone. The recess request was Marcus's defense filing for divorce. I'm told that during the recess, on the attorney's legal pad, there had been a list, options, angles, plays, the little menu of moves a defense keeps. and when they came back, most of that list had a line drawn through it. Marcus could see the notepad from where he sat. He watched his own options get crossed out one at a time in his own attorney's handwriting, and there is no crueler document in this entire story than that quietly shortened list. When they resumed, Marcus was a different man. I want to be precise about this, because it's the thing I'd waited longest to hear about. Marcus Donovan, who spoke in full paragraphs, who finished other people's sentences, who said frankly like a drum roll, Marcus came back from that recess and said 4 words. So what are the options? I'm told his own attorney answered that one carefully, the way you talk to someone standing near an edge. That there were no good options left in the civil matter. That the more pressing concern was no longer the painting or the money. That a manufactured document submitted into a formal proceeding on a protected asset was not the kind of problem you settle with a check. It was the kind of problem that gets its own file, in a different building, with people who carry badges. Are you telling me this is criminal now? Marcus said. 4 more words and a 5th. Still no music in them. I'm telling you, his attorney said, that we need to stop talking about selling the painting and start talking about you. Not even a question mark in his voice when Marcus finally spoke again. Just flat words from a man who had run out of the thing that had carried him his whole life, which was the certainty that he was the smartest person in every room. He wasn't smooth anymore. The smooth was gone, and it was never coming back. And somewhere under the fear, I think even Marcus could feel that. While Marcus was learning to speak in fragments, Sophia was doing the thing people do right before the end. She was bargaining. She'd figured it out by then. The name. She'd sat with Kay Hampton long enough, turned it over enough times, and somewhere in the middle of a sleepless night, the coincidence stopped being a coincidence and became a face. Her husband's face. The man in the paint-stained shirt she'd called a charity case had a second name, a real one, a respected one. And she had been married to him for 8 years and never once asked what he was working on. You'd think that would have stopped her. It didn't. It sent her instead to my attorney's office, because Sophia's first instinct in any disaster is to find the angle, and she had convinced herself she still had one. I'll admit I thought about that a lot afterward, the moment Sophia understood who I actually was. I'd imagined it for years, in the abstract, the way you imagine saying the perfect thing to someone who wronged you. And the real version was nothing like the fantasy. There was no confrontation, no speech, no face-to-face. She just found out from a bulletin, alone, at night, and had to sit with it by herself. I never got to see it. That's the honest cost of doing this quietly. You trade the satisfaction of the moment for the certainty of the outcome. I'd make the trade again, but I won't pretend it's the same as being in the room. She came prepared. In her bag was a copy of the divorce settlement, annotated in her own handwriting, margins full of notes, concessions she was willing to make, points she thought she could trade. She'd stayed up making it. It was, in its way, the most honest work she'd done in months. I want to help, Sophia told my attorney, sitting across the same desk where a plain folder had once sat unopened. I know how this looks, but I can be useful. I gave a full account of the handoff. I'll testify to exactly what happened. Whatever Ethan needs from me, That's very generous, my attorney said, and she meant it warmly, which was the problem. Sophia had braced for coldness. She was ready for coldness. She could have fought coldness. What she got instead was a woman being genuinely, professionally kind to her, while explaining, one gentle sentence at a time, that there was nothing she could possibly offer. Here's where we are, my attorney said. Mr. Brooks's position doesn't rely on your testimony. It doesn't rely on your account of the handoff. It doesn't require your cooperation in the divorce to succeed, and it won't be improved by it. The record is complete. It was complete before you walked in. But I was there, Sophia said. I'm a witness. You are. And everything you witnessed is already documented in ways that don't need you to confirm them. A small, kind smile. I don't say this to hurt you. I say it so you don't spend money and hope on the idea that you have leverage here. You don't. There's nothing to negotiate because there's nothing we need. Sophia tried another door. Then let me help with Marcus. I know things. I know how he talks, how he moves money. I was close to him. I can give you Marcus. We have Marcus, my attorney said gently. Marcus gave us Marcus. He's been doing it for months, in writing, in front of officials. You'd be offering us a copy of something we already own. There has to be something. And here Sophia's voice did a thing it almost never did. It cracked, just slightly, on the word something. I can't have nothing. I can't walk out of here with nothing. I understand, my attorney said, and the terrible kindness in her voice was the confirmation. Because you are only that gentle with someone who has already lost. And Sophia heard her own defeat inside another woman's compassion. That is the most complete way to lose. not to be beaten, to be told warmly that you were never in the game. And the cruelest turn of the knife was one my attorney didn't even intend. Somewhere in that gentle conversation, Sophia understood that the man whose mercy she was hoping for, the quiet husband she'd handed $100 for his dignity, had built a case so airtight that his own lawyer could turn away everything Sophia owned without so much as making a phone call to check. That is what Ethan is, she must have thought. That is who I was married to. And I gave his masterpiece to my boyfriend to hang over a bar. Sophia's hand stayed near her bag the whole meeting. The annotated settlement was right there, ready, all her careful handwriting waiting for the moment the conversation turned toward a deal. The moment never came. There was no turn. You cannot produce your concessions to someone who isn't asking for anything, and so the document stayed in the bag, unread, the most prepared thing in the room and the most useless. The meeting ended kindly. That was the worst part. My attorney walked her to the door and wished her well and meant that too. Sophia made it to her car. Parking garage, second level, concrete and fluorescent hum. She got in and she put the annotated settlement on the passenger seat. She'd finally taken it out of the bag, in the car, where there was no one left to show it to. And then she just sat there. She didn't start the engine. She looked at the steering wheel like she'd forgotten what it was for. A woman holding a stack of concessions nobody wanted, in a car she wasn't driving, at the bottom of everything. And Marcus, meanwhile, was in a hallway trying to sell a painting he no longer owned in any way that would survive a Tuesday. I heard about this call too. During a break in the proceedings, he stepped out, phone to his ear, and he tried the oldest move in his playbook. He tried to move fast. He called a buyer. Not to sell cleanly, that door was shut. To sell dirty. You'd be assuming some provenance risk, Marcus said, quick and low. But that's exactly why the number's what it is. This is a significant work at a distressed price. The dispute is noise. It resolves. You've got an 8-figure piece for a fraction. That's not risk. That's the trade of the year. It was the same pitch he'd used 100 times. The same confidence, the same words, the trade of the year, the noise that resolves. But he was pitching weather that had already happened, to a man who had already checked the forecast, and I could have told him, the words don't work when the situation underneath them has changed. A confident sentence in the wrong world is just noise wearing a suit. I heard there's a registry issue, the buyer said. Not smooth, not cruel, just a man protecting himself. And now people are saying the paperwork's bad. I can't touch a piece with a paperwork problem, Marcus. You know that. Nobody serious can. The paperwork's fine, Marcus said too fast. It's a technicality. And here he reached for the word he'd used from the start, the one that had shrunk a felony to a chore. It's a formatting thing. But you can only call it a formatting thing so many times before the room starts hearing what it actually is, and Marcus could tell by the silence on the line that this room had finally heard it. The buyer made small, non-committal sounds. The kind of sounds that mean no dressed up as maybe. Marcus's contacts had started seeing his name in the dispute records, and in that world, a name in a dispute record is a smell that doesn't wash out. Marcus closed with something that used to land. It didn't land. He heard it not land. And then the call was over, and he stood in that hallway with the phone still against his ear for a second after the line went dead, holding a dead phone the way you hold a hand that stopped squeezing back. He put the phone in his pocket, he straightened the suit that had stopped working, and he walked back into the room to find out what the options were, in a story where he had, at last, run completely out of them. Part 8. Public Record. I did go to the hearing, the last one. The one where it all became real in the only way that lasts, not in anyone's memory, not in a story told at brunch, but in a public record that will outlive every person in the room. I sat off to the side, where I always sit, in a chair against the wall, a man in a decent shirt that nobody looked at twice. And I watched 2 years of quiet work walk into a room and lie down on a table, one document at a time. My attorney didn't perform. That's the thing I'd asked her for, and she delivered it perfectly. She didn't build to anything, she didn't explain, she simply entered the package. For the record, she said, we're submitting the authentication filing, dated and time-stamped, the registry report, the forensic examination of the transfer document, and the studio recording of the original removal of the work. 4 things. She named them like a grocery list. And that flatness was the most devastating sound in the room, because you only say a thing that plainly when you know it doesn't need any help. She laid them out. The authentication record, the one Clara processed, older than everything. The theft filing, Stout, the registry report that had flagged the painting the day a specialist ran a routine check. The forensic analysis, the red circle date, the forgery born after the fact. And the footage from my own studio, the night Sophia walked in with Marcus and carried my life out the door for $100. All of it, on camera, exactly as it happened. Not explained, entered. There's a difference, and the difference is everything. An explanation invites an argument. A record just sits there being true. They did play a few seconds of the footage, Not for drama, for the record, to establish the item. And I watched it with everyone else, my own studio, dim, familiar, and Sophia walking in with Marcus behind her. Her mouth moving, his hand reaching, the painting leaving the frame. 10 seconds, no sound in that room but the small mechanical hum of a screen, and in those 10 seconds every person present understood the entire case without a single word being spoken over it. Marcus watched the footage too. He had to. And I'll tell you what it is to watch a man watch the exact moment he thought he was being clever, replayed in a room where being clever has stopped mattering. His jaw worked. Once. That was the extent of it. Nobody in that room reacted the way you'd react to a movie. That's the strange thing about real proceedings. The bigger the moment, the quieter the room. No gasps, no whispers. Just careful people writing careful notes, turning the loudest event of several lives into paragraphs. The hearing officer read the summary aloud, in that grave, unhurried institutional voice they use, and I sat against the wall and had the strangest experience of my life. I listened to the full weight of formal legal language, parties, instruments, representations, findings, describe a chain of events that had started with my wife's boyfriend peeling a single $100 bill out of his wallet in my studio. That's the gap I kept turning over. $100. One handwritten nothing of a note. And it had now generated more official documentation than everything else I've owned in my life combined. Somewhere in a government building, there is more paper about that $100 bill than about my birth. I found that quietly hilarious, in the way you're allowed to find things during the most serious moment of your life, silently, to yourself, so nobody sees. Then the DA's representative spoke. This was new. A DA's representative had not been in these rooms before, and everyone understood what her presence meant before she said a word. The state has reviewed the forensic findings, she said, and is proceeding on charges related to the fabrication and submission of a fraudulent instrument in connection with the disputed work. She confirmed the charge. She used the word, the real one, the one Marcus had spent months not saying, the one his soft verbs and clean formatting had been built to avoid. Fraud. Filed. Formal. On the record. That was the moment the whole architecture inverted. For months, Marcus had been the man making a claim and Ethan the inconvenience contesting it. Now, in one sentence, Marcus was the defendant and the painting was evidence, and the confident man at the table was the one with the most to lose in the building. The floor of his entire situation had quietly become the ceiling. I watched Marcus when it landed. I'd waited a long time to watch Marcus's face do something honest, and it finally did. His attorney leaned over and murmured something in his ear. Quiet, close, the kind of sentence a lawyer only says when the strategy conversation is over and the damage control conversation has begun. And Marcus Donovan, who called my life garage art, who asked my wife what he owed her for my painting, who spoke in full paragraphs and finished everyone's sentences, Marcus nodded. Slowly. Once. He didn't say anything. For the first time in the entire story, the man had nothing. No angle, no verb, no confident line about the trade of the year. Just a nod, in a suit that had finally completely stopped working. And then came the part I had built everything else around, though almost no one in that room knew it. The record needed to establish the provenance chain formally, which meant establishing who Kay Hampton was, the name on the authentication, the name in the museum catalogs, the credentialed authority whose work anchored the entire case. And so it was entered, in plain institutional language, as a matter of record. That Kay Hampton and Ethan Riley were one and the same person. 3 museum catalog citations, peer-reviewed attributions, a career, a real one, with a real name attached to it at last, spoken into a public record by an institution that does not flatter anyone and cannot be argued with. I never told a single person in my old life who I was. Not Sophia, not in 8 years. I never needed to. Because here's the thing about the truth. It doesn't require your audience's agreement. Proving yourself to people needs them to nod along. Being correct doesn't need anyone at all. The record always knew what I was. It was just waiting for the rest of the world to need to look. And when the dual identity was confirmed, when it became a permanent fact in a public file, I did the only thing my body was allowed to do in that room. I exhaled. Once. Slowly. The single breath of a man watching something he set in motion years ago arrive exactly, precisely, on time. Not triumph. I want to be clear about that. Not a fist in the air. Just the quiet, bone-deep relief of being finished. Here's the thing nobody tells you about a moment like that. I'd imagined it for years, the day the truth would finally stand up in public and say my name. In the fantasy, it felt enormous. In the room, it felt like setting down a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was heavy. There was no rush of joy. There was just the strange, level quiet of a man who no longer had to pretend to be smaller than he was. Because that was the real prison, in the end. Not the marriage, not the money, the pretending. 8 years of shrinking myself to fit the size other people had decided I was, of letting failed artists stand because correcting it would have cost me the one advantage I had. The record didn't just charge Marcus, it let me stop performing my own smallness. And that, more than anything Marcus lost, was what I'd actually come for. Sophia wasn't in the room. She found out the way the rest of the world did, on a screen, alone. She was at her desk when the filing became public, the office thinned out around her, most people gone home. And she read it on her phone, the way she'd read the bulletin weeks before, except this time there was no ambiguity left to hide inside. The public record, Marcus, charged. The dual identity, confirmed. And there, in one dry paragraph, her own name, listed, without drama, as the party who had facilitated the original transfer of the work. The party who facilitated. That's how history would remember Sophia in this story. Not the wife, not the woman with the good job and the good taste and the interesting life. The party who facilitated. 6 syllables in a public file forever. There was a photo running with some of the coverage, not of Ethan, there are never photos of Ethan, but of the painting itself. Her painting. The garage art. The muddy little moody thing she told Marcus to hang over his bar, now printed in an art world story beside a number with more zeros than she'd let herself imagine. She'd held that painting. She'd decided it was worthless with her own 2 hands and given it away for the price of a nice dinner. She read the paragraph once. She didn't read it twice. And then she put her phone face down on the desk. I need you to feel that gesture, because it's the whole reason I structured it the way I did. Months ago, in part of this story you've already lived through, Sophia put her phone face down on a table because Marcus had stopped answering her calls. She was the one being left then. She thought that was the bottom. Now here she was, alone in an emptying office, putting her phone face down again, this time because the record itself had answered, and its answer was her name, in the paragraph where the damage started. The same gesture. A completely different silence. She'd come full circle to a place she never knew existed when she started walking. And Marcus, in his own version of the same silence, was learning what a network is worth when the record turns. His phone, which used to ring constantly, which used to be the instrument of all his easy power, had gone quiet in the other direction. Now he was the one dialing. Now he was the one watching calls go out and nothing come back. Contacts, colleagues, the buyer from the hallway, the whole warm web of people who'd always picked up for Marcus Donovan, one by one, they stopped. I picture him in that hallway. I wasn't there, but I can see it, scrolling his contacts, that long gold list of important people, and pressing call, and getting the 4 rings and the voicemail, and pressing the next one, and the next. The buyer who wanted the trade of the year, the consultant who'd first squinted at the painting, the agent, all the people who exist in a man like Marcus's life precisely to pick up the phone. None of them did. Not because they hated him, because self-preservation is faster than loyalty, and in his world, a fraud charge is contagious, and no one wanted to be the contact log entry that got pulled into it next. It's the neatest correction in the whole thing, and no judge ordered it. A man who treated other people's silence as a tool his whole life discovered what it feels like from the inside, not because anyone punished him, but because a name in a fraud filing is a phone that people simply stop answering. He built that silence himself, call by unreturned call, exactly the way Sophia had once sat listening to his voicemail greeting, promised to get right back to her. The last piece was small and cold, and I wasn't there for it either. Sophia went to her own attorney to hear what was left of the divorce, and the answer was less than she'd hoped, and none of it the painting. The work can be part of your claim, her attorney told her. No warmth in this one. Sophia had spent all the warmth she was going to get in other offices. You can't claim a share of an asset you transferred, and you certainly can't claim a share of one that turned out to be stolen property in the eyes of the record. That door is closed. It was closed the night you gave it away, we just didn't know it yet. Sophia didn't argue. That's how you could tell she was finally, completely done. Sophia, who explains herself before she's asked, who pivots to grievance before a question finishes landing, sat and said nothing for a long moment. I thought, she started and stopped. Tried again. For 8 years I thought I was the one holding that marriage together. The money, the house, the kriba, everything that mattered, I thought that was me. She looked at her hands. And it turns out he was sitting in that studio the whole time being someone I never even bothered to meet. That's not a legal question, her attorney said, not unkindly. No, Sophia said, I know. There isn't one anymore, is there? So I get nothing from it, Sophia said. Not fighting, just confirming the shape of the whole. You get the settlement, it's fair. A pause. It is also exactly fair and nothing more, which I suspect is the point. Mr. Brooks isn't being cruel, he's being precise. Frankly, precise is worse. Frankly. The word Marcus used to wear like a crown, landing now in a lawyer's mouth describing the men who beat him. I almost wish I'd been there just for that. Her attorney slid the settlement across the desk. Fair and cold, every line of it. The document version of a man who had decided a long time ago that he would take back exactly what was his and not $1 of revenge on top of it. Because revenge on top of it would have been emotional, and I had promised myself years ago in a quiet studio that I would never once let these people see me be emotional about them again. Sophia looked at the settlement. She didn't reach for it right away. She let it sit there a moment, this final accounting of a marriage she'd been so sure she was the important half of. Then she picked it up. She didn't read it. She just held it, the way you hold a thing when there's nowhere left to put it down. Back in the proceeding room, my attorney came over to the wall where I was sitting and told me, quietly, that the settlement was accepted. It was done. All of it. I nodded once. That was all. The exhale from earlier had already resolved into something even quieter, something I didn't have a word for yet and wouldn't find until later, alone, in a studio, in front of a covered canvas. I looked at the door. I didn't look at Marcus, who was still at his table, still being spoken to in low voices, still, I'm sure, waiting for a version of this that resolved in his favor. There wasn't one. There had never been one. Not since the night he decided a painting for $100 was a decoration acquisition. I stood up, and for the first time in a very long time, I had absolutely nothing left to wait for. There was only one thing left to do, and it was waiting for me at home, in a corner, under a grey cloth. Part 9. The other painting. The inventory was over, the tags were gone, the legal hold had lifted, the money had started to right itself, and one ordinary morning I walked into my studio with light coming through the window for the first time in what felt like years, and I was, at last, free to do the one thing I'd been saving. I stood in the middle of the room, the place where the painting that left used to lean, empty now, just a clean rectangle of wall a shade less faded than the rest. And in the corner, exactly where it had been since before any of this started, the covered canvas. The grey cloth. The birdcage draped to keep the bird asleep. I want to tell you something about that canvas, and it's the last thing I'll tell you, so let me get it right. Through every part of this, the handoff, the auction, the flag, the challenge, the forensic report, the charge, the entire slow machine of it, not one single person ever asked me what was under that cloth. Not Sophia, in 8 years, not Marcus, who stood 4 feet from it holding my other work. Not the consultant, not the auction house, not the inventory official with his careful clipboard, not the lawyers, not the DA, not the record itself. The most valuable thing in my life sat in plain sight in the corner of every important scene, and the world's total curiosity about it came to exactly nothing. I have never had to lie about it once, because a lie requires a question, and no one ever asked. That is either the loneliest fact of my life or the most useful, and I've stopped being able to tell the two apart, and honestly I've made my peace with that. I crossed the room, I put my hand on the edge of the cloth, and I stood there for a second longer than I needed to, because some part of me knew that the moment I lifted it, this whole long chapter of my life would officially be over, and even a chapter you're desperate to close deserves one last breath before you shut it. I pulled the cloth away, and there it was, the other painting. The one I was actually working on all those nights while everyone slept and decided I was nothing. Not a companion to the one that left, it's better. The one I never authenticated, never filed, never breathed a word about to a single soul, because the moment you name a thing, you hand the world away to take it from you. This one I kept nameless on purpose. This one was mine. It was a portrait if you want to know that much, not of a person exactly, but of a room seen the way you only see a room when you've spent 1,000 quiet hours in it and stopped waiting for anyone to join you. It was the most honest thing I ever put down. The painting that left was a masterpiece. Anyone could see that eventually, with the right expert and the right light. This one you had to have lived my life to understand, which is precisely why it was safe. The world only steals what it can already price. The painting that Sophia gave away for $100 was worth 50 million, and it was real, and I let it go without a flicker, because it was never the one that mattered. It was the decoy I could afford to lose. I let them take the fortune I didn't care about so I could keep the one thing I did, and neither of them ever knew there was a choice being made in front of them. You can take a great deal from a man who lets you believe he has nothing left to lose. That was the whole architecture of it in the end. Everyone thought this was a story about a painting worth $50 million. It never was. It was a story about a man who owned two things of enormous value and understood, from the very first night, that if he was calm enough and quiet enough, they would only ever come for one of them. Let them win the fight you can afford to lose. It is the oldest move there is, and it works every single time, because greed cannot imagine a man who doesn't want the bigger prize. I looked at it a long time. Nobody's price tag on it. No catalog, no citation, no institution's blessing. Just the best thing I ever made, seen by exactly one person, which is one more than most true things ever get. I thought about all the nights I'd spent on it, at this work table, while Sophia came home late or didn't come home at all, while she called me a dreamer to her friends in the next room, while she built her whole idea of me out of the fact that I was quiet and poor and easy to overlook. Every one of those nights, this was here. The answer to the question she never asked was drying in the corner the entire time she was deciding I didn't have one. That's the thing nobody understands about being underestimated. It doesn't feel like an insult while it's happening. It feels like privacy. It feels like freedom. When the whole world agrees you're nothing, no one watches what you do, and a man no one watches can build absolutely anything he wants, in plain sight, for years. I didn't hate Sophia, standing there. That surprised me. I'd expected to. At the end, I'd rehearsed hating her for a long time. But hate is a way of still being married to someone, and I was done being married to her. What I felt was closer to what you feel looking at a photograph of a house you used to live in. Recognition, and then nothing. A door already closed. And I didn't feel triumphant about Marcus either, which surprised me less. Marcus was never really the point. Marcus was just the man who happened to be standing there when the truth I'd built finally needed somewhere to land. He picked up a fortune and called it garage art, and everything that happened to him after that, he did to himself, one confident signature at a time. I never laid a hand on him. I just filed a piece of paper years ago and let him run. Clara found out later that I'd had it the whole time. She called me. She's not a sentimental woman, so what she said was, "You had that in the room during the inventory and said nothing. Professionally, I'm impressed. Personally, you're an idiot, and you should have called me 2 years sooner." Which, from Clara, is roughly a love letter. I draped the cloth back over it, gently, the way you cover something you intend to move and not to hide. And I picked it up. It's not heavy. Nothing that important ever is. There was one more thing I had to do, and I'd agreed to it only because it closed the circle. I sat for a single interview. One. An art publication, serious, quiet, the kind that gets things right. They'd been chasing the story since the dual identity hit the record. The recluse, the alias, the $50 million painting handed off for the price of a dinner. The interviewer was good. She asked the real question, the one everyone wanted. After everything, who is Ethan Riley, really, and why did he hide it for so long? People keep calling it a hidden identity, she said, as if you were pretending to be someone. But that's not quite it, is it? No, I said. I wasn't pretending to be Ethan Riley. Ethan Riley is who I am. The other name is just where I kept the part of me that people hadn't earned the right to see. And your wife never knew, in 8 years. My wife never asked. There's a difference, and it's the whole story. She let that sit, and then she asked the big one, the headline question, the one she'd come for. And I'd been carrying the answer for years. It turned out to fit in 4 sentences. I spent a long time letting people believe I was smaller than I am, because a quiet man hears everything, and I decided a while ago that I would rather hear than be heard, I said. The paintings were always exactly what they are. The only thing that was ever fake was the way people looked at them. I didn't take back anything that wasn't already mine. A pause. And I was never hidden. You just weren't looking. Then I stopped. The interviewer waited. She had that look people get when they're sure there's a 5th sentence coming. The one that ties it up, the quote for the headline. I let the silence sit. There was no 5th sentence. There had never been a 5th sentence. I'd composed those 4 so long ago, in the dark, over a canvas nobody asked about, that saying them out loud felt less like answering a question and more like finally setting down a weight I'd carried into every room of my adult life. 4 sentences. Most efficient conversation I've had in years. She published the 4 sentences exactly as I said them. No 5th. To her credit, she understood that the missing 5th sentence was the point, that a man who'd spent 8 years saying less than he knew was not going to end his one public statement by finally over-explaining. The empty space after the 4th sentence said more than any quote she could have squeezed out of me. The painting she'd handed away went back to the auction house, the real way this time, clean, under a proper listing. And when it went up, the listing carried both names at last, printed together where anyone could see them. Ethan Riley, M. Sterling. The man on the mailbox and the man who signed the corners. Finally, the same person in public, worth exactly what he was worth the whole time. Across the city, on the same kind of ordinary afternoon, Sophia was packing her home office into boxes. Her life was coming off the shelves and going into cardboard. The divorce was final, the settlement fair and cold, the house being emptied and sold. She worked through it the way you work through the wreckage of a decision, methodically, so you don't have to feel it all at once. Somewhere in the middle of that packing, her phone lit up on the desk. A name she used to run to. Marcus. Calling, now, from wherever a man like Marcus calls from when his network has gone silent and his lawyers have stopped being cheerful. Calling her, of all people, because she was the last number left that might still pick up. She looked at its ring. She did not answer. She turned the phone face down and went back to the boxes, and if there's any justice smaller and more exact than that, I haven't found it. The two of them, at the end, reduced to one unanswered call between them, each finally learning the lesson they'd spent the whole story teaching each other. She took a jacket down from the closet, one she hadn't worn in a year, and out of habit, before folding it into the box, she checked the pockets. Her fingers found a piece of paper. She drew it out. $100 bill. Folded once, then once again, the way she'd folded it that night in the studio, without looking at it. Marcus's $100. The price of my painting. The price, it turned out, of everything. The marriage, the lover, the house, the version of herself she'd been so certain about. All of it had left through the same door, and it had cost, on paper, $100. And here it was, in her hand, at the very bottom of everything. She looked at it for a moment. I wasn't there. I don't know what her face did. I like to think I don't need to know anymore. Maybe she finally remembered folding it into her purse that night without looking. The one small motion this whole thing turned on. A woman not bothering to see the value of what was in her own hand. Or maybe she just saw a wrinkled bill and an old jacket. Either way, the story of that $100 ended exactly where it deserved to. Then she dropped it into the donation box by the door, on top of the old sweaters and the books she was giving away, and she went back to her packing. The most expensive $100 in the history of the city, given away a second time, to no one in particular, by a woman who finally understood that she had never once known the value of anything she'd been handed. And me? I carried the covered painting out of my studio and into the light. I stopped in the doorway for a second and looked back at the room, the work table, the empty wall, the corner where the cloth used to be. 8 years of being invisible in my own house, and it had come down to this. One clean, quiet room, and a man walking out of it carrying the only thing he'd ever refused to let anyone take. I pulled the door shut behind me. People think a quiet man is an empty one. I let them keep thinking it. It's the most useful thing I own, and unlike the painting, no one can put a price on it or take it away. They got the story. They got the charge, the record, the $50 million headline, all of it. I got to walk out the door with the thing under the cloth, the one nobody ever thought to ask about. Turns out, that's the whole trick. You let the world take everything it's willing to fight for, and you quietly keep the one thing it never even noticed